after we welcome in our next guest, Jason Silverstein, writing at Slate.com, wrote a piece, Why White People Don't Feel Black People's Pain, and I want to focus on how that might relate to the Zimmerman trial. Hey, Jason, how are you, sir?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. Certainly a provocative title and a provocative piece that you wrote, and we could go through all the experiments and all the data you have to back up your claim, but I want to focus on how this relates to George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin in that case. How do you feel that, as you put it, a failure of empathy, if that is indeed true and true in this case, how do you feel it affects the Zimmerman trial?
Well, I think that what this case comes down to is a big debate that we're going to have about whether or not a perception was true. I think we can all agree, and I think the prosecution and defense both agree, that George Zimmerman, he followed Trayvon Martin because he perceived him to be dangerous. And if you're with the defense on this, you're going to agree that that perception was accurate, that Trayvon Martin was dangerous. And if you're with the prosecution, you're going to say that, well, you know what, this was off. And I think. Well,
wait a minute. Time out. Let me stop you. I don't know what you mean by with, but I consider, based on the evidence that I've seen before the trial, and certainly in the last week and a day, I believe there's no way on earth that George Zimmerman could be or should be convicted. So I guess I'm with the defense. I don't think that it's I forget now what you said, that it's right that he was dangerous. I don't think he was. It turned out he probably wasn't. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't going to rob a house. He wasn't going to break into a house. I don't believe that, as George Zimmerman suspected he might do based on other robberies in the neighborhood over many, many years and the many calls he's made. But I think it turned out that Trayvon Martin did initiate a confrontation.
Well, I guess that's where, I think that's where the disagreement between us might happen, and I'm sure that a jury's going to go back and forth in their deliberation on this. It seems to me that there was this perception here that, look, this kid was, he's a criminal or on drugs or a punk, and then he follows me. And what I'm just trying to suggest here is what no one seems to disagree about is that there wasn't a time when he stopped to consider that maybe he was something other than that. And what I guess I'm trying to raise, and to do so in a way that then we can talk about other broader social problems, is that what if there had been that moment, and what if there had been that empathy there, that perhaps that weren't true, and then I think we would all prefer not to be in this situation. And I think that this same sort of lack of empathy does drive other more routine, probably very less newsworthy types of disparities. But it can also provide a way that we can solve these problems, which I think what's getting lost in this piece is that there is hope here and that this is not about racial animosity.
Okay, well, I want you to follow up on that, but he told and again, this is misrepresented, the 311 dispatcher that he spoke with on the initial phone call, this guy looks like he's up to no good or on drugs or something. It's raining, and he's just walking around looking about. We heard, if you were listening to today's testimony, they played the interviews he did with the police afterward, 2 separate interviews, and he said he kept looking at me in the car. He kept looking back at me and looking at me, and it was weird that he kept looking at me. And it's not until he's asked by the dispatcher, okay, is he white, black, or Hispanic? And Zimmerman says he looks black. So I don't know how race plays a part here, except that it was Trayvon Martin's female friend who testified that it was Trayvon Martin who referred to Zimmerman as a crazy ass cracker. So it would seem to me that if there's race in this case, the only evidence that's been entered so far would show that it was on Trayvon Martin's part.
Yeah, I guess the way that I end up seeing it is, that, and I think perhaps supporters on the Trayvon side would look at this more like, well, look, why was it that he got out of the car to follow him? At what point does, this stop being fear of this person? And at what point are some of these things that he's afraid of start adding up to something that looks like it's racial bias? Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the judge has instructed that they cannot consider racial profiling. But of course, in this larger public jury pool that we all are part of, I think this has been one of the primary considerations.
Well, they call it they could say profiling, but not racial. And unfortunately, in an Al Sharpton world, he has made, and others in the media have now made profiling and mean racial profiling. Even though we all profile, cops profile in every way, shape, and form, and people profile and discern and discriminate in every act they take and everything they do. But if you say profile, it automatically means racial profile. But they are allowed to say it. But again, the act of getting out of the car, the act of calling. First of all, he thought the gentleman looked weird, and he happened to be black. But apparently most of the crimes that were committed in this townhouse complex over the years, over 8 years, where he made 48 calls, most of those crimes were committed by people of color. So therefore, he would naturally be suspicious, more suspicious of people of color, if in fact I'm correct and that is the case, and I believe it is. And again, none of these 911 calls, none of them, not this case in particular, and not some of the other calls that have been allowed into evidence that I've heard some of, does he say it's a black guy. He's always asked, and that's when he describes, when he's asked, is he black, white, or Hispanic, and that's when the race comes up. So here's a guy who tutored. I think we'll find out if they do present a defense, which I don't even think they need to put on a defense. We'll find out that he tutored African-American children. So, I mean, I just don't see how race plays into this case at all, again, except in the case of, Trayvon Martin calling him a crazy-ass cracker.
Well, I mean, I think that, the point about becoming, as you said, perhaps he had whatever reason to be suspicious of black people in his neighborhood. I think that this is precisely what racism is. It's assuming that.
How is that racism and not good common sense? If all the, first of all, there's no indication to believe that, based on anything he said, that he wouldn't have done the same thing for a white person, and he himself is Hispanic. Okay, but I mean, if there were, and I don't know the percentage, but let's assume for argument's sake that an overwhelming majority of the burglaries in his complex have been by black people or polka dot people, well, then when he sees polka dot people, he's going to be more suspicious. How's that racism? Racism is the inherent belief of the superiority of one race over the other. How is that racism?
Well, not exactly, right? So racism is also about just assuming that every single member of a group is precisely the same.
And you know that George Zimmerman believes that?
Well, this is what you suggested when you said that because there have been this overwhelming number of crimes, then some people have to be criminals.
Well, that's good police work. I never said have to be, sir. You said that. I said it would certainly make sense to suspect or to have your red flag go up more for the people who are the type of people who have committed the crimes in the past. If in fact, and for argument's sake, we are assuming that, whether or not it's factually true, I believe it is, but let's assume it for argument's sake. Isn't that common sense?
You're reducing a person into a type instead of a person, and this is where empathy comes in.
No, not empathy. Profiling. But profiling. But what if it was always what if all the burglaries had in 10 burglaries they saw a blue the sedan or a blue Mustang? Well, if he sees a blue Mustang, he's going to call the cops immediately. Now, I know Mustang's not a person, but it's the same thing.
Well, I just think that we disagree there because even in the example that you just gave, calling the police and then following someone and starting an altercation.
Whoa. You said he started an altercation. Where do you get that from, sir?
Well, I think that's what the testimony shows.
Which testimony shows that?
Well, Zimmerman's own testimony that he got out of the car, he didn't.
That's not starting an altercation, sir. No. I'm surprised at you. because you're a PhD and a professor, and you're saying he started an altercation. So if you follow someone, sir, maybe, we're told in this day and age, if you see something, say something. So if I see someone who looks suspicious, okay, and I'm following them, I get out of my car, I'm following them, I'm calling 911 because he's carrying a knapsack or whatever, and am I starting an altercation, sir?
I think that I just read the evidence differently than you.
Am I? Well, where is the evidence that says he started? And I'd love to hear it. Where is there evidence? Because that would be a blockbuster in this case where the prosecution has presented nothing. So where is your evidence that you've seen in this case that George Zimmerman started an altercation, which, by the way, would take away his right to self-defense? So where is it?
Well, I think that's the point where it actually gets muddy for my side, because I think that actually Florida law prescribes that if he was the aggressor of the initial fight, that if the victim of that initial fight shows greater force, then the aggressor can use self-defense. I think that's where it gets muddy for my side in particular. I think that when I followed the dots here of that he gets out of the car, he follows him, he's clearly, not afraid of this guy. He's got a gun. He's got 2 flashlights. The next thing you know that they're having a fight and he gets shot. I don't see why this kid deserves to die.
Okay. Well, sir, you're ignoring the law. You're ignoring the evidence. And you're going solely, if you would tell us that it's totally your opinion based on none of the evidence presented in this case, saying I don't see why this kid has to die. Let me ask you a question. If Trayvon Martin was bashing his head against the concrete and broke his nose and was punching him, and George Zimmerman was yelling for help, and George Zimmerman perceived he might die or be severely bodily injured, under Florida law, he has a right to kill him. So where in that scenario would you say he didn't have a right to do that? Based on what evidence?
It seems I read the case as that was Trayvon Martin defending himself.
What was Trayvon Martin defending himself? He was what? On top of him banging his head into the wall? That's defending himself?
I think that if you start a fight and you lose the fight...
Sir, but why? I ask you again, I implore you, Jason Silverstein, I beg you, what evidence do you have, if any, and if you don't have any, it's just your opinion, say so. What evidence has been presented that you know of that leads you to say Zimmerman started the fight?
The evidence that I see, and of course it is
what
my
evidence?
Opinion, it's yours.
What evidence?
This is fun. Sorry. I mean, quite frankly, I can't really cite you as much as saying that what I've followed thus far seems to be that.
Okay. All right, Jason, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I had a guest earlier named Jason Johnson, who's a professor also, interestingly enough, and does work on TV and all that. And he insisted that the 911 operator, police officer, by the way, he wasn't a 911 operator and he wasn't a police officer, told Zimmerman, stay in the car, and he disobeyed. And I said, Jason, because I talk to Jason Johnson every week, I said, Jason, for a year we've known, you've heard the tapes, you've read the transcripts. He was never told, stay in the car. He was asked, and then I read from the transcript, are you following him? Yes. So he was not in the car. He was following him. We don't need you to do that. Not don't do it. Not get back in the car. None of that. So again, that's a lie or a misrepresentation. And now you say he started the altercation, blah, blah, blah. And yet I ask you, what's the evidence? You say, well, I don't really know. So, I mean, this is not a way to run a criminal justice system. Would you agree?
Look. In fairness to the last point, that the operator did clarify why he can't give anyone commands.
Well, not only that, he wasn't in the car. I'm saying my last guest or my previous guest insisted over and over and over that he was told to stay in the car. He was never told to stay in the car. It's not in the transcript, not in the tape. Lie. Fiction. So I'm just saying, just because it's a young black man who's dead doesn't mean you change the rules of the criminal justice system and you make up things and you presume things without evidence to put this man in jail because it seems like the right thing to do.
Well, let me just.
Maybe you lack the empathy, sir.
Let me ask.
How about a touche for that one? No.
This is great. I feel like a real writer now. But if to go to the empathy thing for a moment, is there nothing here to say that, look, if he had stopped to consider that Trayvon was anything other than someone who was dangerous.
Sir, if he didn't get out of the car, probably Trayvon would not have been dead. Absolutely. But that's not the case. But that's not the case. That's not the case.
But is there something that we cannot all, no matter, look, I'm sure this is being hotly debated throughout this country, that we can all take from this for the future into suggesting that perhaps not every time you have a suspicion that someone is a criminal or is up to no good or is a punk, that you need to start or you need to engage in this type of altercation. And I'm just wondering if there's a teachable lesson.
You don't know who started the altercation. All we know, and if you listen to Zimmerman, we know more, but all we know for sure is that an altercation started. Yes, he got out of the car. He called the 311. He got out of the car to ascertain an address, as he told the police in 2 separate interviews, which were played in court today, because he wanted to give the cops an exact address to where they should go. Then he lost sight of him, so that's why he got out of the car. You're then assuming that he threw the first punch. We don't know that at all. No one knows that. No one's ever said it, except the prosecution and no witness. In fact, the only person alive says the opposite happened. But listen, Jason, I appreciate it. We did it in good fun, good spirit, and I hope you'll come back.
All right. Thank you so much for having me on. We'll see how it plays out.
My pleasure. Take